In today's episode, we are focusing on one of the most brutal dictators of all time, Saddam Hussein, and the 2003 mission that sought to capture him after years of war crimes and evasion from justice. Operation Red Dawn, named after the 1984 action film that starred the late Hollywood legend Patrick Swayze. It was a well-planned covert mission which had one primary objective: to capture Saddam Hussein alive. History would show that this mission was a massive success, and resulted in Hussein being found guilty of numerous war crimes, being sentenced to death by hanging. The viral video of his execution has since raised speculation and even conspiracy theories about its authenticity and the subsequent fallout within the Middle East. However, there is no doubt that the tyrant was apprehended during Operation Red Dawn. So, who was Saddam Hussein, and why was he so important in the eyes of the West? How did Operation Red Dawn originate, and how was it carried out? And what were the resulting factors and the repercussions of his apprehension? Or more importantly, was it worth it? Join us as we take a look at one of the most successful missions in recent times, Operation Red Dawn. What would you do if you woke up tomorrow with a time machine? Go back and prevent the JFK assassination? Stop the Nazi movement early on? Or perhaps you'd go back in time and show off all the fancy gadgets and tech of today's world to an unbeknownst person of the past? Well, with today's sponsor, the book The Ultimate Guide to Rebuilding a Civilization, you could get ready to do exactly that. No, it's not a time machine, but it's even better. It's an incredibly beautiful book featuring over 400 pages of the most amazing inventions of humankind. With over 180 topics divided into 23 chapters, every page of this book features awe-inspiring handmade illustrations, including unique engineers' drawings and medieval art. It uses clever engineering with high-quality matte art paper. Just look at its stunning laminated cover and special bindings. The book is a captivating illustrated encyclopedia, and it offers a fascinating journey through the most significant human inventions, appealing to both adults and children. It's not just a book, it's a fun and engaging way to explore history, making it perfect for your personal library, or as a thoughtful gift for collectors, friends, parents, colleagues, or anyone with a curious mind to delve into the wonders of human innovation. But don't just take my word for it. The project has collected more than $3.2 million of investments on Kickstarter and Indiegogo, as well as achieving bestseller status in Germany and Italy, while also being an official bestseller on Amazon US. Over 50 professionals were involved in the creation of this book, ranging from artists to scientists, architects to designers, and more. This isn't just an ordinary history or science book. It's a totally unique concept, and unlike any book that I've owned before. So if you want to be time travel ready, or simply want to impress with your Christmas gifting skills, make sure to grab this book using the link in the description below. Saddam Hussein was born on April 28, 1937, in Al-Auja, a small village about 8 miles south of Tikrit on the western bank of the Tigris. Having grown up in the region and become heavily involved in politics, Saddam Hussein was able to assert his character and gain control of the government after President Ahmed Hassan Bakir resigned in 1979. His tumultuous, violent and despotic reign lasted from 1979 until his arrest in 2003. His tyrannical methods, often fused with violence, aggression and oppression, resulted in many costly and unsuccessful wars against Iraq's neighbouring countries. His need for power quickly spread across the political sphere, and he was appointed chairman of the Revolutionary Command Council, as well as Prime Minister, among others. He created a special secret police organization, ensuring that his position was never opposed. The establishment would go on to suppress and cancel all means of hostility or resistance toward him, and to promote propaganda that elevated his status and character. Saddam's endgame was to replace neighbouring country Egypt as the guiding light of the Arab world, and hold full authority over the Persian Gulf. He attempted this by invading the oil fields within Iran in September 1980, but the crusade diminished rather abruptly and it was deemed a failure. As a result, Saddam was forced to downplay his planned mission for economic development due to the costs which were wasted in Iran. A ceasefire was eventually agreed between the countries in 1988, after years of hostility and battles in the region. But this did not stop the dictator from continuing to build his armed forces within Iraq. In August 1990, the Iraqi army overran neighbouring Kuwait. Hussein's plans to facilitate the oil revenues to strengthen the economy resulted in a global trade embargo being placed on Iraq. The Persian Gulf War began on January 16, 1991, and ended 6 weeks later when the Allied military coalition drove Iraq's army out of Kuwait. This further crushing blow and embarrassing conquest led to rebellions within Iraq by both Shias and Kurds, something which Saddam could not afford. Thus, it forced him to quash their revolts by any means necessary. It is reported that thousands of men, women and children fled the region towards refugee centres, while others were rounded up, tortured and/or murdered for their disobedience. One of the main factors of the ceasefire agreement with the UN meant that Hussein's Iraq could not build or possess any biological, chemical or nuclear weapons. However, Saddam's ego would not bow to the demands and the agreements laid out in the contract, and so he refused to liaise with the organization's weapons inspectors. A 4-day airstrike by both the United States and Great Britain in late 1998, named Operation Desert Fox, was conducted in an attempt to push Saddam into submission. Both Western nations publicly announced that they planned to remove Saddam from power. In the midst of such threats to his regime, Saddam was preparing to hand the reins over to one of his sons, Uday or Qusay, who would ultimately succeed him in office. Similar to Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin, Saddam Hussein was viewed by many to be a strong leader within his homeland, despite his brutality and ignorance of the suffering that was occurring to his people. Anti-Western propaganda and rhetoric, as well as his tyrannical grip on the nation, meant that civilians were forced to support him, or the consequences would be dire to say the least. Then came the horrors of 9/11, a day that will be remembered in infamy. In the wake of the terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center buildings, Saddam Hussein and Iraq became major suspects in selling biological and chemical weapons to terrorist groups. Government officials in the United States purported that such weapons were being built, stored and sold within the region, and stressed the need to conduct a disarmament process. Despite Saddam allowing UN weapon inspectors to carry out their checks within Iraq in November 2002, he would ultimately sabotage their efforts at every possible turn, thus leading to the end of diplomacy with Great Britain and the United States. Tensions had risen to a boiling point, and so on March 17, 2003, US President George W. Bush demanded that Saddam Hussein resign from his position and to flee the country within 48 hours. This would then allow agents to search for weapons of mass destruction. Otherwise, it would risk all-out war. As many expected, the dictator refused, and so the United States, along with their allies, most notably Great Britain under Tony Blair's government, attacked the region on March 20, 2003. The Iraq War began with US aircraft bombing a bunker complex where it was thought that Saddam Hussein was conducting his affairs and plans for retaliative strikes. Though the assault did not kill Hussein, confidence in his leadership amongst the Iraqi population had dwindled significantly. Those ordered to fight for Saddam soon made it clear that it was a losing battle. On April 9th, the capital city of Baghdad became occupied by US military personnel and forced Saddam to go into hiding. Operation Red Dawn would begin soon after Saddam vanished from public view, being able to remain hiding for some time and holding on to the majority of the national treasury, which he was able to take with him. His sons, Uday and Qusay, would eventually be found and killed in the city of Mosul on July 22nd, before finally Saddam Hussein would be captured on December 13th. It all began with Operation Iraqi Freedom, which began in March 2003. US military and intelligence agencies began conducting operations to find and cross-examine high-ranking members of Saddam Hussein's regime. The plan was to hold these high-value individuals, or HVIs, in custody, where they would be fully prosecuted at a later date. These persons of interest were depicted in the famous deck of Most Wanted playing cards, created by 5 employees of the Defense Intelligence Agency, or DIA. In the build-up to hunting down Saddam Hussein, the agency believed that the HVIs would ultimately reveal the whereabouts of the dictator after extensive interrogation tactics. However, this strategy did not seem to work, as DIA interrogator Staff Sergeant Eric Maddox admitted that the connection between former regime elites and Saddam Hussein may be the wrong approach. He stated that the disintegration of the Iraq state at that particular time would have coincided with the demise of its formal networks. US Army Strategic Intelligence Officers Tom Pike and Nick Long, as well as Air Force Acquisition Officer Perry Alexander, claim in their 2015 article, Understanding Nations, New Ideas to Analyze Foreign States, that, quote, similar to an ecosystem with its plants and wildlife forming a complex web of relationships, people are the embodiment of their interdependencies, end quote. Thus, it seemed highly likely that Saddam Hussein would have reverted back to relatives or close family connections in order to assist him in his efforts to evade capture and to formulate a plan to hold on to power by any means necessary. Another militarized operation was assembled and headed up by Eric Maddox of the 4th Infantry Division, as well as intelligence officer Major Brian Reed from the 1st Brigade Combat Team, 4th Infantry Division. Task Force 121 was assigned to capture and or kill all of the aforementioned HVIs after the mission involving the killing of Saddam's sons. Unfortunately, their attempts resulted in very little at the beginning. Going back to the drawing board, the task force employed complexity theory in order to assist them in identifying where Saddam would source his social dependents. Using their own knowledge, connections, and military intelligence, Reed and Maddox found, quote, of the 214 actors in the total network, there are only 23 actors with direct ties to Saddam Hussein, end quote. They believed that close ties to blood or brotherhood are a fundamental aspect of many terrorist, criminal, and gang organizations. Tracking and tracing certain individuals led the task force to focus their attention on Saddam's hometown of Tikrit. On October 11, 2003, Reed and Maddox began their next move and centered their focus on the al-Muslit brothers, members of Hussein's inner circle of bodyguards who were connected to the Hussein family by large. Omar al-Muslit was the head of the family, and his farm was raided, providing valuable intelligence. Ibrahim al-Muslit was also considered a trusted individual within Hussein's security, reporting directly to the dictator. Saddam relied heavily on the brothers for protection, as he would have been fully aware that the US would be using signals intelligence, or SIGINT, to try to locate him, and his paranoia would have been increasingly prevalent. Upon locating Omar al-Muslit, the interrogation and raid provided assistance to the team in obtaining details about his brother, Ibrahim. He was subsequently captured and interrogated, and eventually revealed that Hussein was hiding at a farm in Ad-Dawar, south of Tikrit. And so, on December 13, 2003, Operation Red Dawn was put into action. despite the earlier mentioned attempts at locating Saddam and his henchmen, not to mention the hours of analysis, evidence gathering and interrogations. Members of the 4th Infantry Division's 1st Brigade Combat Team and Special Operations Task Force 121 executed the plan successfully. Operation Red Dawn included approximately 600 forces from the Special Operations Community, 4th Infantry Division, and Iraqi counterparts who entered the Tikrit area and exclusively Al-Dawar, which is located 15 kilometers south of the city. Upon arrival, they cleared 2 objectives nicknamed Wolverine 1 and 2, but were unable to find Hussein. As mentioned earlier, the operation itself was named after the 1984 action film starring Patrick Swayze, and the site names Wolverine 1 and Wolverine 2 are also a reference to the American insurgent group that appear in the film. Settling into the streets of Tikrit, military personnel began interviewing locals and discussing the conditions to which they had now become accustomed, hoping for some vital information. It was reported that a suspicious site was identified and searched near one of the units. Within this area, a camouflage compound within a larger structure was discovered. By 1800 hours, and under the cover of darkness, the troops from the US 4th Infantry Division had settled on the small covering, which also contained a mud hut and a metal lean-to structure. Searching the compound, troops discovered a so-called spider hole, camouflaged with bricks and dirt and covered with polystyrene and a carpet. This concealed section was a 6 to 8 foot deep hole and so happened to house the dictator himself, Saddam Hussein. He was found in the carefully hidden hole by Colonel Hickey. Quote, "2 hands appeared. The individual clearly wanted to surrender." End quote. Saddam Hussein was pulled from the hideout at approximately 20:36 hours and was described as being disorientated and a little bewildered at the situation. This was reported by Major General Ray Odierno, commander of the 4th Infantry Division. Once he knew the game was up, he stated in English to the troops, quote, "My name is Saddam Hussein. I'm the president of Iraq and I want to negotiate." End quote. In a somewhat humorous response, Major Reed replied, "Regards from President Bush," the final insult to a man who had once controlled various regions of the Middle East and whose reign of terror amongst his own people had finally come back to haunt him. It is also noted that 2 of Saddam's associates were also camped within the hideout. These were also captured and taken into custody for extensive questioning. The chamber itself was definitely not the best of living conditions. As mentioned, the 6 to 8 foot deep manhole provided just enough room for one person to lie down flat on the ground, and was equipped with its own air vent and extractor fan. Upon further inspection of the hidden barracks, Major General Odierno noted that the adjacent farmland station consisted of 2 very small rooms in an adobe hut. He continued to describe the quality, standards, and layout of the quarters, noting that one was a bedroom that was cluttered with clothes, including new t-shirts and socks, and a very rudimentary kitchen with running water. The purpose of the adjoining units was clear. Saddam Hussein would have to switch from the farm building to the hideout hole as and when coalition forces were in the vicinity. Major General Odierno also added that the hole was very close to the Tigris River, within view of the now captive's palace. Odierno stated that, quote, "I think it was rather ironic that he was in a hole in the ground across the river from these great palaces that he built, where he robbed all the money from the Iraqi people." End quote. Interestingly, it was revealed that the area containing the secret sanctuary had previously been searched by US forces during their initial scout for Saddam. However, it was clearly evident that Hussein was using his limited resources and lookouts to spot for any and all pending threats or potential captors, as he had not been there at the time or had disappeared at short notice. A spokesman said it was likely he had been there for a short time when the ultimate information came in from a member of a family brought in for questioning. Major Odierno stated that no cell phones, pagers, or telecommunication devices were found at the site. This suggests that Saddam Hussein had taken on more of a moral support role and was no longer working with the Iraqi resistance. At the time of his capture, senior US military commander in Iraq, Lieutenant General Ricardo Sanchez, confirmed that Saddam was surprisingly talkative and cooperative, and displayed no signs of injury. He was deemed in rather good health, despite his age and recent living conditions. The former dictator was removed and then taken to an undisclosed secure location by an MH-6 Little Bird. That location would later be revealed as the Tikrit Mission Support Site, where he would be properly identified. He was then taken in an MH-60K Black Hawk helicopter by 160th SOAR from Tikrit to Baghdad and then into custody at Baghdad International Airport. Along with a Glock and an AK-47, there was $750,000 US in US banknotes that were recovered from the spider hole. It wouldn't take long before news began to spread. The initial communication received over the militarized radio summed up the success of this mission in just one word: jackpot. During this formal identification, formative questioning, and general discussion between the US troops and Saddam himself, he was surprisingly natural and even humorous at times. After arriving at the compound, certain troops had described their journey and the demeanor of the former tyrant as being strangely chatty or even charming. In any case, the United States had got their man, and so the processing was finalized by a surgeon who was stunned at his calm behavior and attitude as he said to the doctor, quote, "I wanted to be a doctor when I was a kid, but politics had too great a hold of my heart." End quote. The pair continued their conversation for more than 6 hours, thus showing just how captivating and charismatic the Iraqi leader could be, and most likely how he worked his way to the top and became one of the most powerful men in the Middle East, and indeed the world. In the days and weeks that followed the manhunt and eventual arrest of Saddam Hussein, the 4th Infantry Division's area of operations in Tigris saw its first period of real calm, with IED attacks being reduced by up to 39%. All seemed well, and so Operation Red Dawn was deemed a monumental success. Strategic Intelligence Officer Tom Pike had the task of understanding and analyzing both Saddam and his affiliated networks. US intelligence agencies were able to, quote, define, analyze, and assess a population by the complex adaptive systems they interrelate to. End quote. This was the case when Task Force 121 formulated their plan of action and search for not only Hussein, but to the hierarchs of his former elite. After years of frustration, death, and destruction, finally, on the 30th of June 2004, Saddam was held in custody by military forces at Camp Cropper. This was a former holding facility for security detainees, operated by the United States Army near Baghdad International Airport in Iraq. He was held alongside 11 other senior Ba'athist leaders. From there, they were transferred to the interim Iraqi government to stand trial for crimes against humanity, amongst other offences. Continuing his outspoken approach and headstrong temperament, Saddam shouted and continuously pointed and prodded his finger in a feeble attempt at reasserting his command and control of the situation. The trial itself became a bit of a showcase and spectacle, with the chief judge resigning during the proceedings, one of Saddam's co-defendants being ejected from the courtroom after calling the tribunal the daughter of a whore, and not to mention Saddam's own lawyer being murdered. Khamis al-Baidi, who also represented the dictator's half-brother, Barzan Ibrahim, was abducted from his home and killed by unknown gunmen, sparking outrage, conspiracy theories, and adding to the tragic nature of the whole trial. Then, a few weeks later, Saddam was charged by the Iraqi Special Tribunal with crimes committed against residents of Dhu Jail in 1982, followed by a failed assassination attempt against him. The details of the charges ranged in their severity. These included the murder of 148 people, illegal detainment of 399 people who rebelled against his so-called leadership, and, most disturbingly, the torture of women and children. All the while, his lawyers continuously maintained that Hussein was still in power and president of Iraq, despite all the evidence, both physical and political, to the contrary. After much deliberation, the antics, showmanship, and delusional declarations from the former president, Saddam Hussein was found guilty of crimes against humanity on 5th of November 2006 and was sentenced to death by hanging. In addition, his half-brother Barzan Ibrahim and Awad Hamed al-Bandar, head of Iraq's Revolutionary Court in 1982, were both convicted of similar charges and also sentenced to death. Saddam showed no emotion other than berating the court with insults and waving his finger in defiance. The verdict and sentencing were both appealed, but subsequently affirmed by Iraq's Supreme Court of Appeals. Justice, and arguably calmer, was finally served for Saddam Hussein, who was executed on the first day of Eid ul-Adha on the 30th of December 2006. Believe it or not, even at the end, the former leader's ego would not be diminished, as he formally requested to be executed by firing squad, which he argued was the most appropriate method due to his role as commander-in-chief of the Iraqi military. The request was ultimately denied and he was hanged at Camp Justice, an Iraqi army base in Baghdad's Kadhimiya district. With the capture and execution of Saddam Hussein, most assumed that this would be the end of his reign of violence, intimidation, and self-sabotage. But some evidence suggests that the dictator never met his end here at all. In 2021, the Russian state-owned news agency Sputnik purported that an anonymous Iraqi interpreter claimed that Saddam Hussein was spotted praying in the farmhouse near the site where the United States claimed to have captured him. The interpreter claimed that the news coverage was all fake, and the whole story of Operation Red Dawn was mere fabrication, a form of propaganda to rouse American spirits during the war on terror. Such news stories, or perhaps conspiracy theories may be more accurate, have emerged over the years. In modern times, with the rise of the internet, social media, and deepfake AI technology, the line between what is real and what is not can be very thin. However, at the time of Saddam Hussein's capture, these sightings and reports seemed far-fetched, and most likely stemmed from loyalists, who still viewed Saddam as a godlike figure, even after his arrest, trial, and execution, which proved how brutal and depraved he actually was. The fall of Saddam Hussein was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a far more complicated one. His capture in Operation Red Dawn closed the chapter on a brutal dictatorship, but it also tore open a power vacuum that Iraq would struggle to fill for decades. With the iron grip of Ba'athist rule removed, long-suppressed sectarian tensions surged to the surface, and new forces, both internal and foreign, rushed to claim influence over the country's fractured future. In the years that followed, Iraq became a crucible for insurgency, civil war, and the rise of extremist movements like ISIS. Some would argue that Saddam's removal created space for democracy, while others contend that it paved the way for even deeper instability. There are no simple answers, but Operation Red Dawn remains a stark reminder that removing a dictator is not the same as building peace. Victory in warfare, even at its most precise and clinical, is rarely the final word. It is merely a turning point, one that echoes far beyond the battlefield.